This is the Simpit. I'm your host, Sean Cole, but the real star of today's show is the Thrustmaster TH8A Shifter. Now, this shifter came out quite a while ago, and there are already a lot of reviews on the internet that you can see about this shifter. But that doesn't change the fact that I still get questions, emails, responses, comments all the time. People wanting to know more about this shifter. They want to know, what is it really compatible with? They want to know, how does it compare to the Fanatec Clubsport Shifter SQ? So in this show, I'm going to let you know everything that you need to know about this shifter and put those questions to rest with some very detailed answers. Now let's start things off with a tour of the TH8A Shifter by Thrustmaster. The TH8A Shifter is $149.99 and is compatible with any of the new TX racing wheels when on the appropriate console system. It is also a standalone shifter on the PC. The TH8 shifter is a 7-speed H-pattern shifter with reverse, and it can also be run in sequential mode. The shifter is mostly made of metal and uses a magnetic Hall effect sensor that should last a lifetime. The TH8A shifter comes nicely packaged in a high-gloss box with cool graphics, which gives us great hope just upon seeing the box. Inside the box comes the base of the shifter, a shifter knob, two different wiring plugs, one for the USB and the other with a DIN connection to plug it right into the TX racing wheels. It also comes with a couple of Allen wrenches and a couple of extra screws, a shifter plate, and an instruction manual. The instruction manual is very basic but covers everything that you'll need to know about this shifter. When inspecting the base unit, it has a chrome metal body with a somewhat artistic shape to it. The bottom side reveals the wiring loom that comes out and has a connector on it for one of the two supplied wires. The plug out of the bottom is a nice heavy-duty piece, and the connector is a very cool keyed plug with a threaded lockdown. Above the chrome body is a plastic piece that will accommodate the shifter plate and also covers the mounting portion of the shifter. The H-pattern plate is also chrome in color and has very distinct gates for each gear. Each gate is also clearly labeled, and you can see that the design has curved edges for intuitive shifting. The shifter rod is also metal and has a plastic bushing on it of sorts in the areas that contact the shifter gate plate. And then the top of the shaft is threaded for the chrome type ball supplied with the shifter. The knob is metal on top and rubber on the bottom for a different type of feel in your hand. The threaded post is a standard size and will allow the use of standard aftermarket shifter knobs. There are a few different mounting solutions for the TH8A shifter. It comes equipped with a metal clamp style mount that can be spun 360 degrees to accommodate any angle. The clamp itself has a good amount of bite to it and works best when the back plate can be butted up to the mounting surface. The clamp can open up to accommodate a 2¼ inch thick surface. The shifter gate can also be spun 360 degrees to adjust to the direction that the shifter was mounted or to any angle desired by the driver. All you have to do is loosen the top 4 screws a little bit and spin the entire shifter area, and then retighten the screws again. This is also how the shifter is switched from H-pattern to sequential mode. You want to first remove the shifter knob, then remove all of the 4 screws and pull off the H-pattern plate. You then put on the sequential plate. The direction of movement when in sequential mode is actually up and down in the neutral gate between the gears. The resistance is done by the very small spring on the bottom of the sequential plate. You will put the plate down, add the 4 screws loosely, and then spin the shifter into the desired angle and tighten the 4 screws. The other mounting option is to completely remove the clamp that is installed onto the shifter. Under this clamp you will find 4 M6 mounting holes. These are the same thread as the bolts we use to mount most wheels and pedals. Another feature of the TH8A shifter is that it does come with adjustable tension. That's when you're in H-pattern, not sequential mode, and you can adjust a small screw that's inside this hole. I'll get you a close-up on that. And right now you can see I have it at a pretty good amount of tension. It doesn't just move freely, it has a little bit of tension on it. You can make it looser or tighter to your desired thing. Now that doesn't affect the sequential mode, only when it's in H-pattern mode. And when fully tightened, there's enough friction to overpower the spring tension within the shifter. This does not affect the feel of the left to right in the neutral gate, but only the up and down into gears. And when it is loosened as much as possible, the shifter will go all the way down to a dead fish feeling that lets the lever move anywhere freely up and down. For me, I was happy with something close to the stock out-of-the-box feel. Now before we get down to driving the shifter on track, let's talk about some of its measurements. The overall shifter is a very compact design for a full H-pattern shifter. The chrome body and mounting portion take up only 5 inches left to right. From front to back and including the mount, it measures about 8 inches. From top to bottom, it measures in at 9.5 inches, not including the mounting bracket. With that added, it grows to nearly 10 inches to the clamp, and if opened up all the way, the clamp extends another 4 inches. The shift lever itself sticks up about 5.5 inches to the top of the stock knob. The spacing between gears is fairly significant in such a small package. When measuring at the top of the knob, you will find a touch over 1.5 inches between first and third gears, and over 5 inches from first to 7th gear. On the up and down travel, there is about 4 inches of travel from first to 2nd gear. When in sequential mode, the distance from neutral to either up or downshift is about 5/8 of an inch up and down. Now the TH8A shifter is a direct replacement for the original TH8 RS shifter, which I have right here. And you can see, for all intents and purposes, these are nearly identical shifters. The only real difference when you're looking at them is that this one has a little bit of red underneath the rubber portion of the knob. This one has all black, of course. Another small difference is the actual wire. It's the same connector coming out of the bottom, but the original TH8 RS comes with the USB only plug versus the TH8A, you see, has the connector at the end of the plug, and you can use either the USB or the DIN wire and have that freedom of choice. The other difference is the compatibility. This one is compatible with the Xbox One, with the PS4, as long as you're using the proper TX racing wheel. And this one, of course, is only PS3 and PC compatible. Everything else about them, the adjustment, the way they shift, the sequential mode, everything about them is identical. Now, my preferred method of racing is done on the PC, but as I mentioned at the beginning and just a moment ago, this is compatible with various console systems. When using this with the Xbox One, this shifter is compatible with the TX racing wheel. You'll use the DIM plug adapter for the shifter, and it allows it to be plugged directly into the wheel when using it on the Xbox One with games that utilize a shifter. And in the case of the PlayStation 4, it's the same thing. You use the DIN connector, the DIN wire, and plug it directly into the T300 racing wheel, and that is going to make this shifter compatible with all PlayStation 4 games that, again, utilize a shifter. And in the case of the PlayStation 3, this is going to work just like the TH8 RS shifter. You're going to use the USB wire. It's going to plug into the PlayStation 3 on its own, and it's going to be seen as a secondary device just like you would with that one. Same thing goes on the PC. You're going to use the USB wire. You're going to plug it directly into your computer on its own, and it will be a standalone device on your PC. All you're going to need to do is download the latest drivers from Thrustmaster, install them, and then plug in the shifter. It's very easy, and it's a no-brainer. And at that point, you're just mapping the controls in-game for each gear, and you're up and running. Now, in driving the TH8A shifter, it all starts with the knob on top. It has a very nice round feel to it, and I like the metal on top with the rubber on bottom because it really does allow that different texture that you can feel. Sometimes you grab it on top, sometimes you're holding it from underneath. It just gives you a little bit of freedom on those long races when you're looking for something or getting a little lazy with the shifter. Now, when it's in its idle or neutral gait, the shifter sits in the 3rd and 4th gear spot. So with any pressure, it goes right up into 3rd, right down into 4th. Now, in order to get it into 1st, you actually have some spring tension going against you, pulling into 1st gear. Little bit of pressure to the inside, to the gate, which is nice. Up into 1st, no problem. Pulling down into 2nd, you'll see, once you pull down, once you start to just push it, it will release this shifter right away, and it will pop right back into that third and fourth gate. You do need to give it a little bit of pressure holding it over the left side when making that shift down into second gear. The shift up into third gear is a lot easier because it naturally wants to pop into that third gear. Just straight up, bam, you're into third. Down into fourth is hands down the easiest shift you're going to make with this shifter. You just slap it right down and you're into that gate. Coming up into fifth, you've got to come up into that neutral gate, which just comes right up. You got to give it a little pressure. You have spring pressure against you going into that gate and up into fifth. Again, these rounded edges make that real smooth when you're doing it with it locked down in the car, shifting real nice. When you're in fifth, coming down into sixth is actually maybe the hardest shifter on the shifter, because you do have that spring tension trying to pull you back into the third, fourth gate, but at the same time, if you put too much pressure to the outside, you're going to pop into the outside gate. So this is the hardest shift to make with a shifter, any shifter, not just unique to this one right here. Up into seventh, same thing. You've got that outer gate that's preventing you from going too far. You're coming out of sixth, you can just push it outside as hard as you want, up into seventh gear in that rare case where you're actually driving a 7-speed H-pattern car. Now reverse. Reverse is over here directly below seventh and what would be basically the equivalent of 8th gear. And there is no difference between going in 7th and 8th. I mean, basically you have the same feeling for every gear on the shifter. No detent, no prevention from going into reverse, no way of locking out 7th or 6th gear in this shifter here. Another thing I want to talk about when using the shifter is the moment you actually engage a gear with the shifter. So I'm going to use third and fourth for this demonstration because it's so much easier. When you start the momentum, you feel some pressure against you pushing up into third. And at some point right near getting into third, you'll feel a slight pop. And that's that moment. And when you're pushing it, you can feel the momentum taken over by the spring as it pops up into third. It's not very significant. It's not a big detent of any kind, but you do feel that each time. Same thing coming out of gear. You got to give it a little bit of pressure to get it out of that gear, and then it's going to kind of pop. And you can see the springs take over, and the momentum takes you back into that neutral gate. Another thing is that you can hear, and it's not a metal on metal. That bushing is there, giving it a pretty good solid clunk for such a small shifter. Each and every shift is smooth and very easy to find. There are no extra noises coming from the shifter except for the nice solid click and stop that happens when it fully hits into gear. When switching over to the sequential ability of this shifter, we are only using 2 positions of the shifter. If you remember, when using sequential mode, the movement is actually through the neutral gate, and the shifter now moves in that direction, and it uses that spring pressure going from the 3-4 to the 1-2 gate, or the 3-4 to the 5-6 gate, for part of the pressure of the sequential mode, in addition to the little tiny spring that we talked about inside of the sequential cover. And that spring will give the shifter a totally different feel. It now has a real pop to it that gives it that proper sequential feeling. Pop it up for downshifts and pop it down for upshifts. Some people will even call this a bump shifter because you feel as though you can just bump the shifter up and down. You don't have to grab onto it and you don't have to pull it out of gear. With both up and down shifts, you will feel and hear a positive click when you have reached the gear. I ended up driving the shifter in a variety of different disciplines, from 4-speed NASCAR type cars to high-speed sequential open wheelers. When using it in H-pattern, I found the spacing of the shifter to be rather good, and the spring tension was very nice and the overall feel was positive. The design of the shifter gates made it very easy to get up to speed and consistently make good shifts. I even ran a Lotus 79 race, and even in the heat of wheel-to-wheel battle, made an entire race without a missed shift. However, the moment you start using an H-pattern shifter, the odds of a mistake, the odds of a misshift, they increase hugely, and I had my share of them during testing, that's for sure. Now I'll say, they were rare, and they would decrease over time for sure. Now the overall pattern of the gates were right on, making the shifting easy, but the feeling wasn't exactly like shifting a real car. There is no resistance that feels like you're moving any gears or a shifting fork, just spring tension and that slight lump as the gear engages to feel somewhat realistic. Now that tells you just about everything you need to know about this shifter. I've shown you footage of me driving, and on a shifter it's hard for me to really tell you much more than anything other than the spacing, the way it engages, the way it's built, and I've done all of that. So let's just move on to the good, the not so good, and the bottom line, and then move into some direct comparisons between this shifter and a few other options that you do have available. So let's move on to the good, starting off with, I love its very small, compact design. It's a good looking shifter. It's affordable, it has easy, positive shifts, it's easy to mount, it's got a good, strong clamp, and the shifter never moved while I was using it. It has both sequential and H pattern. It's multi-platform, PC, PS3, Xbox One, and PS4 compatibility. It's made of mostly all metal and it's built to last. It has an intuitive H pattern and it's rotatable to any angle, both the mount and the shifter pattern. Now with the not so good. There's no lockout for higher gears or no detent or lockout for reverse. The sequential cover looks a little bit on the cheap side, being made of black plastic. There's no adjustable tension for the sequential mode. The shifter knob is a little bit on the basic side, and it's not the most realistic shifter feeling. And now on to the bottom line. This shifter is a great shifter for those looking for an entry-level shifter in the PC market. It is also the ultimate shifter for those looking to get the most out of Forza on the Xbox One, or for those looking to get the most out of the next-gen driving games on the PlayStation 4. At this point in time, this is the only shifter on the market that's going to do that today. On the PC side of things, I found this shifter to be good, not great, when it came to its overall feeling on shifts. However, its price point, again, is very low, and that makes it a good entry-level shifter, or for those who are only going to use the shifter from time to time. Now, the one thing that made this shifter very cool was its multiple mounting options, including its very effective clamp and the ability to rotate it to any angle. Slightly turning it just a few degrees towards me helped me shift it a lot more accurately. Now for me, the concept of using an H pattern or even a sequential shifter for that matter is for the added realism, the added immersion that it's going to give you when sim racing. However, it's not going to make you faster. The bottom line is, if I'm racing for trophies, if I'm racing for ultimate lap times, I want to use paddle shifters just like a real Formula One car. Now in closing, I want to make some direct comparisons between this shifter and another shifter that I was able to test recently, that being the Clubsport Fanatec Shifter SQ. Now both shifters are dual mode shifters, meaning that they both have H pattern and sequential mode built into them. In the case of the Thrustmaster TH8A Shifter, it is $149.99 including the clamp. The Fanatec shifter is $200 and the clamp is an additional $30. As you can see, there's a huge difference in the overall design and size of the two shifters. Now the Fanatec shifter is so large that it could actually be difficult to mount into some rigs, and it is rather heavy, and that's something else that you're going to have to accommodate. The other thing is that it can only be mounted in 90-degree increments unless you make some kind of fancy mount that holds it at an angle, versus the clamp and the infinite adjustment of the Thrustmaster TH8A Shifter. The Thrustmaster is much more slim and will fit on most rigs that come with a shifter mount or easily onto any desktop lip, making it easier for a lot of drivers to deal with. When it comes to the dual mode, the Fanatec ends up being much easier to deal with there. Just a flip of the switch and you have changed modes. With the TH8A, you need to actually change the shifter plate and rotate the shifter. When it comes down to shifting, the Fanatec has much more substantial feeling to its movement. There's a detent that you feel coming out of the gear that adds a bit of realism and the overall movement is a little more clunky, and that also feels a little more realistic to me. The Fanatec also has reverse all on its own to the left, and you have to push down to engage that gear. On the TH8A, the reverse is unprotected, and if you accidentally shift it into what would be 8th gear, that could be a problem on its pattern. Both shifters have adjustable tension. However, on the Fanatec, it also changes the sequential mode and the overall feel of the shifter. Now, the overall lighter design and the less clunky feel means the TH8A is actually faster shifting of the two shifters if you're counting the milliseconds of time between gears. But when it comes to compatibility, the Thrustmaster TH8A Shifter is clearly the winner. It is the only shifter that is going to work with all of the modern sims, whether you're talking PC or modern console systems. Now, to be perfectly fair, the Fanatec shifter is a much more substantial and heavy unit, and it also comes in at a much more hefty price. And not all of you are even going to be able to mount this beast to your rig or to your desktop. And sure, in some ways, comparing them side by side, in some ways this does feel a little bit like a toy. However, its compact, slim design, its affordability, its ease to mount, it certainly makes it a viable option. And to be truly fair, if you want to compare it to something that does feel like a toy, that would be the shifter that came with the G27 that has no throw, completely made of plastic, and this is clearly an upgrade. So I'm sorry this was such a long review, but I did want to answer the compatibility questions. I wanted to answer the questions about how it compared directly to this shifter, and I don't even think it's fair to make comparisons to this shifter. Now, if there's anything that I didn't cover, any questions that you still have, please head over to the simpit.com, look up this video, and put your questions there, and I will do my best to answer each and every one of them. This is the Simpit. I'm Sean Cole, and I'll see you on the track.